This is Chapter 42 of Following the Equator. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Following the Equator by Mark Twain, Chapter 42. A Hindu betrothal, midnight, sleepers on the ground, home of the bride of 12 years dressed as a boy, illumination, Notch girls, imitating snakes, later, illuminated porch filled with sleepers, the plague. Each person is born to one possession which outvalues all his others, his last breath. Pudd'nhead Wilson's New Calendar. Toward midnight that night there was another function. This was a Hindu wedding. No, I think it was a betrothal ceremony. Always before we had driven through streets that were multitudinous and tumultuous with picturesque native life, but now there was nothing of that. We seemed to move through a city of the dead. There was hardly a suggestion of life in those still and vacant streets. Even the crows were silent, but everywhere on the ground lay sleeping natives, hundreds and hundreds. They lay stretched at full length and tightly wrapped in blankets, heads and all. Their attitude and their rigidity counterfeited death. The plague was not in Bombay then, but it is devastating the city now. The shops are deserted, now, half of the people have fled, and of the remainder the smitten perish by shoals every day. No doubt the city looks now in the daytime as it looked then at night. When we had pierced deep into the native quarter, and were threading its narrow dim lanes, we had to go carefully, for men were stretched asleep all about, and there was hardly room to drive between them. And every now and then a swarm of rats would scamper across, past the horses' feet in the vague light, the forebears of the rats that are carrying the plague from house to house in Bombay now. The shops were but sheds, little booths open to the street, and the goods had been removed, and on the counters families were sleeping, usually with an oil lamp present. Recurrent dead watches, it looked like. But at last we turned a corner and saw a great glare of light ahead. It was the home of the bride, wrapped in a perfect conflagration of illuminations, mainly gas-work designs, gotten up specially for the occasion. Within was abundance of brilliancy, flames, costumes, colors, decorations, mirrors. It was another Aladdin show. The bride was a trim and comely little thing of 12 years, dressed as we would dress a boy, though more expensively than we should do it, of course. She moved about very much at her ease, and stopped and talked with the guests and allowed her wedding jewelry to be examined. It was very fine. Particularly a rope of great diamonds, a lovely thing to look at and handle. It had a great emerald hanging to it. The bridegroom was not present. He was having betrothal festivities of his own at his father's house. As I understood it, he and the bride were to entertain company every night and nearly all night for a week or more, then get married, if alive. Both of the children were a little elderly, as brides and grooms go, in India. 12. They ought to have been married a year or two sooner. Still, to a stranger, 12 seems quite young enough. A while after midnight, a couple of celebrated and high-priced Notch girls appeared in the gorgeous place and danced and sang. With them were men who played upon strange instruments which made uncanny noises of a sort to make one's flesh creep. One of these instruments was a pipe, and to its music the girls went through a performance which represented snake-charming. It seemed a doubtful sort of music to charm anything with, but a native gentleman assured me that snakes like it and will come out of their holes and listen to it with every evidence of refreshment and gratitude. He said that at an entertainment in his grounds once, the pipe brought out half a dozen snakes, and the music had to be stopped before they would be persuaded to go. Nobody wanted their company, for they were bold, familiar, and dangerous, but no one would kill them, of course, for it is sinful for a Hindu to kill any kind of a creature. We withdrew from the festivities at 2 in the morning. Another picture, then, but it has lodged itself in my memory rather as a stage scene than as a reality. It is of a porch and short flight of steps crowded with dark faces and ghostly white draperies flooded with the strong glare from the dazzling concentration of illuminations. and midway of the steps one conspicuous figure for accent, a turbaned giant with a name according to his size. Rao Bahadur Baskirao Balinkanjil Pitale, Vakil to His Highness the Gwaikar of Baroda. Without him the picture would not have been complete, and if his name had been merely Smith, he wouldn't have answered. Close at hand, on house fronts on both sides of the narrow street, were illuminations of a kind commonly employed by the natives, scores of glass tumblers, containing tapers fastened a few inches apart all over great latticed frames, forming starry constellations which showed out vividly against their black backgrounds. As we drew away into the distance down the dim lanes, the illuminations gathered together into a single mass, and glowed out of the enveloping darkness like a sun. Then again the deep silence, the scurrying rats, the dim forms stretched everywhere on the ground, and on either hand those open booths counterfeiting sepulchres, with counterfeit corpses sleeping motionless in the flicker of the counterfeit death-lamps. And now, a year later, when I read the cablegrams, I seem to be reading of what I myself partly saw before it happened, in a prophetic dream, as it were. One cablegram says, "Business in the native town is about suspended, except the wailing and the tramp of the funerals. There is but little life or movement. The closed shops exceed in number those that remain open." Another says that 325,000 of the people have fled the city and are carrying the plague to the country. 3 days later comes the news, "The population is reduced by half." The refugees have carried the disease to Karachi. 220 cases, 214 deaths. A day or two later, 52 fresh cases, all of which proved fatal. The plague carries with it a terror which no other disease can excite, for of all diseases known to men it is the deadliest, by far the deadliest. 52 fresh cases, all fatal. It is the Black Death alone that slays like that. We can all imagine after a fashion the desolation of a plague-stricken city, and the stupor of stillness broken at intervals by distant bursts of wailing, marking the passing of funerals, here and there and yonder, but I suppose it is not possible for us to realize to ourselves the nightmare of dread and fear that possesses the living who are present in such a place and cannot get away. That 500,000 fled from Bombay in a wild panic suggests to us something of what they were feeling, but perhaps not even they could realize what the 500,000 were feeling whom they left stranded behind to face the stalking horror without chance of escape. Kinglake was in Cairo many years ago during an epidemic of the Black Death, and he has imagined the terrors that creep into a man's heart at such a time and follow him until they themselves breathe the fatal sign in the armpit, and then the delirium with confused images and home dreams and reeling billiard tables, and then the sudden blank of death. To the contagionist, filled as he is with the dread of final causes, having no faith in destiny, nor in the fixed will of God, and with none of the devil-may-care indifference which might stand him instead of creeds, to such one every rag that shivers in the breeze of a plague-stricken city has this sort of sublimity. If by any terrible ordinance he be forced to venture forth, he sees death dangling from every sleeve, and as he creeps forward he poises his shuddering limbs between the imminent jacket that is stabbing at his right elbow and the murderous pelisse that threatens to mow him clean down as it sweeps along on his left. But most of all he dreads that which most of all he should love, the touch of a woman's dress. For mothers and wives, hurrying forth on kindly errands from the bedsides of the dying, go slouching along through the streets more willfully and less courteously than the men. For a while it may be that the caution of the poor Levantine may enable him to avoid contact, but sooner or later, perhaps, the dreaded chance arrives. That bundle of linen, with the dark tearful eyes at the top of it, that labors along with the voluptuous clumsiness of Grisi, she has touched the poor Levantine with the hem of her sleeve. From that dread moment his peace is gone. His mind, for ever hanging upon the fatal touch, invites the blow which he fears.